what is your spiciest number one hot take about Christianity? The people are trying to get me canceled.
Oh, God. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this video. I'm here with the illustrious Saint Gibson.
Hi.
Who is a professional tarot reader. She holds a master's in theology and art from Princeton Theological Seminary, and she is a speculative fiction author. And it is a real treat to not only call her a colleague-ish, but a very good friend for many years. There's a very lovely photo of us back here that you probably can't see, but
as babies,
we have round faces and sapphic energy flowing off of us in every direction except at each other.
Oh,
it's a real treat to answer some questions with her today. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Rachel. And I am here with the wonderful and inimitable Rachel Parsons. She is a professional spiritual director, has a master's degree in spiritual direction and formation. She's also an amazing body theologian, and a lot of her work specializes in spiritual transitions and the theology of the body and in embodiment, which is something that's really exciting to me. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for like 8 years now. It's almost been a decade. But also collaborating with her in the past and working with her on her practice, and hope they will be able to again in the future. So we just got really excited about the idea of kind of joining forces and doing a Q&A and being able to connect with you guys in a little bit more of a personal and meaningful way as we're all practicing good isolation. Please stay home. We will come into your home through the magic of Zoom. And we're super excited to get into your questions tonight. So thank you so much to everyone who submitted them. These questions came from all over different platforms. They're from Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram, all kinds of things. So we're just going to go through them randomly. This is going to be pretty freewheeling. So this one is pretty dense. There's like 3 sections, but we can just kind of take it in yummy little bite-sized pieces. First of all, do you have any suggestions about how to foster healthy, productive conversations about faith with really fearful, defensive, the Bible says that I believe it, that settles it types of Christians? The answer to this question is really, really contextual. It depends on how ingrained these people are into your life. If there's any power differentials, this is very different if you're having this conversation with a friend versus a parent you live with versus a parent you don't versus a pastor, right? So I want to be sensitive to that and know that there's going to be different sorts of pressure coming from that. And you might be in a position where, you know, you have a strong spiritual conviction and you feel like this is driving you apart and you want to bridge that gap, or you might be in a position where you're defending your humanity and maybe even your safety. So I want to encourage whoever asked this question to always prioritize your own well-being and safety. If this is a person online, I'm going to be your aunt who's too online and say, just don't engage. Just don't. You always come out looking bad. It never works. It saps your strength. They live rent-free in your head and they get free press. Don't do it. It's a bad look. You don't want to do that. Assuming that this person knows you and loves you, saying, I hear you, that's interesting. Here's why I believe and feel this, and this is why this is equally as important to me. Again, you probably aren't going into this conversation lightly. There's probably an issue on the table or a couple that mean a lot to you. So just constantly keeping that human-centered element is good. If someone has that deeply ingrained of an extreme feeling belief system, whether it's to one side or the other, it will not change overnight. Doesn't matter what a good job you do or how much you love them. If that is going to change, it's going to take years, them talking to many people, having their own life and spiritual experiences, reading 5 books, 6 podcasts, having 9 fights with 4 people in 3 cities. Like, it's a journey. So just know that as much as you have the energy to be a stepping stone in a spiritual evolution that you would like to see for them, you can do that. But if you feel like you're just getting stepped on over and over again, it's probably time to pull out.
Mm-hmm. And I want to highlight, too, the importance of this being an equitable conversation.
Yes.
Like, if you feel like you are immediately on the defensive, that is a great sign that you really aren't required to be having this conversation in the first place. I can think of times where I was working at this coffee shop and my boss, of all people, backed me in this corner, basically literally, and was trying to figure out if I had a literal relationship with the Bible. And I was just immediately just stuttering and said really incoherent things, and the conversation went nowhere.
Yeah.
And ignoring the legal issues with that, that was just not a situation where I had any real space to have a productive conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would have been just the same off, and I would have been just the same off if I just shut it down.
Yeah.
And so if it's possible to shut it down and not have any emotional damage done, that's a better takeaway than the alternative, than feeling like you put up a good fight, because that isn't going to be valuable anyway.
And you're also always empowered to say, I don't have the energy for this conversation right now, but I'd like to talk to you later. And you're also always empowered to say, you know what, I'm not sure. I don't know. Let me think about it. Let me read about this. Let me pray on it. And kind of to echo what Rachel has said, I've had conversations like this, and I've been on both sides of this. I used to be very, very fundamentalist in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Let that be known that we've been on the other side of this, like, deeply and profoundly.
I was the worst in high school. I went to the newly founded SGA to be present in love to the LGBTQ people, not knowing, of course, that I am a bisexual. That came later. It should have been a warning.
Oh,
So like, I've done it. I've been through it. And then the same person, the next part of this question is, what are some ways to cope with the grief and anger that can arise from being passively aggressively othered by a faith community because of your beliefs? Ooh, baby, take it away. Take it away.
Well, you see, so Saints in my relationship is also very strong because we have gone through that whole spiel together. And I think that is the most important thing. As you undergo any kind of, if you're transitioning out of having that attitude and losing the community, or if you're just in contact with the community that is putting you in that position, having somebody else, even if it's one other person, who you can look at and be like, you see this, I see this, we both see this.
Yeah.
That's so important, because so much of this is based on people believing this beyond the shadow of a doubt. And if you present evidence to the contrary,
you'll get gaslit.
You get gaslit. Yeah, this concept that you are just so cosmically wrong about this. Mm-hmm. Having somebody who you know is intelligent and insightful and who you trust, who holds your perspective, is so crucial. In no spiritual community is it ever okay to feel small.
No, yeah.
The community is making you feel small. It's not a spiritual community. It's a clique in the lunchroom.
I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on interfaith marriages and romantic relationships.
Oh my God.
All right.
So the important thing here is to have a sense on what the goals of your faith are. If your faith is the kind of faith that is very interested in making converts, there's not really much wiggle room as far as seeing different iterations of spirituality as equally beneficial.
Right.
That is a good indicator that the interfaith relationship is not for you. But if your religion or spirituality is what I would call outcomes based, where the goal is to be more loving or be more generous or be more whatever, and it doesn't really matter what it takes to get there, then I think an interfaith relationship can work really well, as long as the other person is on the same page as well. Yeah, like I definitely never thought I would ever be with somebody who wasn't a Protestant. When my concept of God expanded, my dating pool also expanded.
What's your partner's faith expression?
They are Buddhist.
It's really good to know what your goals and values are, again, for the relationship. So like, if a value to you, if something that's really, really important to you is having a partner with whom you can share your spiritual practice and have spiritual experiences together, that's great. Some people, that's a really high on their list of things they're looking for in a partner. And then you're probably going to have to do a little more digging in, are we spiritually compatible? Do I want this to be someone that I can take to mass or temple? And do I want to do spells together? Like, can they be on my level? If you imagine either adopting or conceiving, fostering kids, and you want to take them to your faith tradition, you need to have that conversation with your partner at the start. Listen, I'm a Scorpio. We talk about commitment, okay? Don't wait till year 3. You need to talk about it, because you're going to cry if you don't, okay? Just have the uncomfortable conversation so you can get on the same page.
And if you are this sort of person who you do need to definitely be on the same page, that's okay. That's just important.
Yeah, that does not mean that you are closed-minded, like you're just being realistic about what you want. It's like some people want kids, some people don't. Some people are never going to move outside of their hometown, some people are. Like, it's really okay. I'm going to need you to also occasionally bring your drink into the frame so it doesn't look like I'm just a wine on.
I do! Look, everyone, I imbibe alcohol as well. I think it's also important to make sure that there's space in the relationship, if you are of different traditions, for each of you to practice your faith to the extent that you want to. Mm-hmm. Like with my partner, Sundays we basically don't see each other because they have an entire 4-hour-long class that they go to, and I go to church sometimes. Depends.
Are you like go to the woods, you know? I guess great.
Just take off my bra in the mountains or receive the Eucharist. It depends.
I love it for you.
And so it can be tempting. I mean, this is a great problem, but if you like want to be together all the time, it can be tempting to not be diligent about that. But that's something important to look at from the beginning, to make sure that you're both able to tap into those things to the extent that you need. Be supported in your spiritual practice.
And I think I am actually going to have a take on this, an opinion, shockingly, a spicy hot take. Some people really, really want this, and I've seen a lot of this in my life, but I'm going to go ahead and say that no matter what your faith tradition is or your religious expression, I do not think it's healthy for them to meld entirely. Okay? Like, I think you do need to kind of keep a separate sense of self about your spiritual expressions, even if you have the same religion and you go to a lot of the same events and worship spaces and you do Bible study together or you share things. Like, that is awesome. Do that. If that energizes you, if that's the cement of your relationship, bless you. But I have seen a lot of couples who feel they become entirely responsible for each other's sort of spiritual growth and progression. And I think that's really not healthy. So even if you're on someone who you feel like you're really on the same page, it's okay to take a breath and kind of like go to a service by yourself or like do something with yourself and then come back and share that with your partner. So that's a little bit of a spicy hot take and not exactly what was being asked, but resist the temptation to totally fuse your spiritual lives. I do think it becomes smothering and it hinders your growth.
Yeah, as long as what you're doing, like, you have the permission of your husband to do that.
What are psalms that feel like spells or curses? So I don't have actually like direct recommendations. I don't do a ton of psalm magic. I would like to get into that more because it's a tradition that I have access to that's so powerful. Like, I do a lot of work with saints, which we'll get into later. So like, I should probably look into this. But I will say that there's like strong established traditions across different religions of using the psalms for whatever you want to call it, magic, intention setting, spells, like orienting the world in your favor or imploring God in a very specific way to reach a desired specific outcome. I think those are all pretty much the same, but that's fine. And a lot of this comes down to us through, of course, Jewish magic systems, whether or not they might be called that in the traditional record, and then Kabbalah, which is a staunchly Jewish expression of Hermeticism, kind of in the Western tradition, but again, it's Jewish, so it really, really stretches back, and it has really, really deep cultural roots. But psalm magic is also used extensively in hoodoo and root work and conjure work from those diasporic blended traditions. So depending on where you are, those traditions might be closed to you, but they're there. Santeria as well, a little bit. But I would say that if you are in a position where you or your immediate family and ancestors would have a strong personal connection to the Psalms and the text, they are there for your use, whether that is a more magical and esoteric use or for comfort. Like, the Psalms are where human emotion lives, like distilled down to this very, very potent brew, which is why they're used in magic so much. Like the Psalms were songs, they were sung, they're poetry, they're directed at God, and a lot of them are worship, but a lot of them are also lament, anger, asking God to do something really specific for you. Help me with my studies, stop my enemies, help me get through this trial, aided, which is why they're used in magic so much. There's a ton of ways to bring them into your magical practice. I'm not even going to get into all of them because you can arguably use pretty much every psalm as kind of a invocation. But there's a lot of resources out there if you want to get into them. And then just also any psalm that you connect with personally that kind of feels like a mantra for you, you can use in that way as well. Let's do, well, this one is, I'm pretty sure for me, because I get asked this question like often. Do you consider yourself a witch? To which my response is, what do you think? Yeah, I mean, probably. Like, yeah, that's what that word means. I would say that it's not a word that I have any problem with. I use it like in different connotations depending on things. I think that it was a word I used to use a lot more, and now my conception of myself and my practice is a little bit more diverse. And also a lot of what I do is connected to traditions in which they have other words for a magical practitioner or for someone who intercedes with God or works with saints. Like, I think one of the strongest parts of my, like, specifically magic, like, that's what that is, like, textbook definition is working with saints. But like, that comes like heavily from Catholic and Episcopalian traditions in which they might not use that word. So go ahead, like, you can call me that. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that, but yes, like my house is full of incense and candles and crystals. We have saints everywhere. I'm very, very spooky. Me and the moon were tight. I have crossroads late at night. I could tell you stories, maybe not on Maine, but yeah. So the end of this question is, do you view that as something that has more to do with how you choose to identify versus being defined by practices? I'm going to say choose to identify, because people are really specific about the language that's used. That's a very charged word, whether you don't like it because you feel like it is sinful or because it feels too white feminism-y to you. Like, there's a lot of reasons. But I know people from a variety of backgrounds, traditions, like ethnic and cultural practices who use or don't use that word for their own reasons. So it's always good to ask. Okay. Hey, Rachel.
Hey.
What is your spiciest number one hot take about Christianity? The people are trying to get me canceled.
Oh God. Oh boy.
No, say for this.
Probably just the Bible is a spiritual journal and not a magic book. And when we try to make it a magic book, we ruin lives.
Piping hot, zesty tea. You heard it here first.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what I have a lot of hot takes, but they're usually really specific. Oh God, I don't know. This is not hot take. This is historical record and like scriptural record. Mary Magdalene was the first to preach the gospel. Paul needs to calm down. Respect himself a little bit. And women have always had the spiritual authority to preach the gospel, to preside over the Eucharist, to impart apostolic succession. And people ruin that. Rachel, how do you learn to trust yourself on whether a spiritual path is right for you? This is like what you do in your sessions.
This is my job. You look at the practice, you say, is this Protestant Christianity? And if it is, then you keep doing it.
Don't lie to the people.
Okay, so that is my favorite question, because that is exactly the question we're asking in spiritual direction.
Yes.
And once we have an answer to that question within spiritual direction, we are just figuring out more and more of what that means and how to have that continue to grow as true in your life, in every area of life. And it's just a blast. So the way that I usually guide people through this is by having them distill the things that they believe beyond the shadow of a doubt. And that can be so insanely vague. Because if we're all really honest, there's not a whole lot that we can say with that much certainty. Um, and so that can be the whole freaking Apostles' Creed, or that can just be mine, which is something has happened. um, and so once we figure out what that is, we can listen to the body for a bit, because the body just has no tolerance at all for the mind's bullshit. And so we can present some things that maybe we've sort of like mentally done gymnastics to think we believe. Mm-hmm. And at the moment we listen to the body, our kidney or whatever it may be might be like, actually no, boss. Through spiritual direction, having somebody guide you through that process is really helpful, because there's kind of two brains looking at it, two bodies listening to it. So it's helpful to see where authenticity lies. And it's also important in that setting to be with somebody who's not trying to push an agenda on you. Really, I think like once you've distilled what you can believe beyond the shadow of a doubt, from that point, it's really about choice, I think, and it's about what you enjoy. And I think that's okay. And that can change over time. Like maybe sometimes you really resonate with a certain denomination or a certain way of doing things, and then over time that kind of shifts, which can be dicey depending on the tradition, because there's kind of this sense of like, I'm devoting my life to this and I'm going to do this and here's my confirmation name and like all these things. But I think if we have a sense of being able to have total freedom within the framework that we can believe with integrity, that can just lead to so much more joy in spiritual practice. Like I think of it kind of like a playground where you have all of these things set up that you can get behind, and then you can just kind of go play with them. Yeah. And that's fine. And if you over time get to a place where some of the bare bones of what you believe beyond the shadow of a doubt shift, then you can just adjust accordingly. Like I think part of maybe what you're asking is just, okay, do I get on this path and then am I stuck here forever? And I would really say no. I think absolutely no. Depending on your tradition, it might be harder to have that sense of freedom, but that would be a question to ask when you get there.
Yeah. That's phenomenal advice. That's like the advice that I repeat to everyone that I've gotten from Rachel. Your body knows. Your body knows. I would also add, my father always says this, and it's really, really good advice, which it actually is a Bible quote. Look at the kind of fruit that this is bearing in your life. Is it bearing good fruit or bad fruit? Which means, is this belief, this way that you're looking at yourself and treating yourself, this way that you're acting, an ethical decision you're making, a yes or a no you're giving yourself. When you step back from yourself, is it sowing good things in your life? Is it bringing about temperance, self-control, joy, pleasure, strong relationships, a sense of responsibility and compassion and love? Or is it bringing about shame, self-hatred, a sense of being out of control, a sense of bitterness towards others, paranoia? Like, look at what it is doing to your life. That's really general advice, but also I think that, like, I do believe that God is inherently good, and God inherently wants our good. God wills our highest best, our highest pleasure, our best good, our best service to others. And I think all those things are really intertwined.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to ask the question of whether or not having a direct spiritual path is even right for you.
Yeah, that's also a possibility.
Speaking of tarot sessions with Saint, I did one a while back where I was just like, do I have a direct spiritual path, or do I just kind of like let this smorgasbord of whatever I am do its thing? And the cards were like, I don't know, maybe. But like over time, it's really been clear that if I have a direct spiritual path, I will lose my mind, because I just really thrive in a very eclectic interfaith environment. And like my Easter practice this year was just dancing in my living room, since I couldn't go anywhere, and like just kind of allowing every single spiritual concept that came up processed through my body, through my movement. And that was so rich and so full and satisfying and all these things.
Yeah.
And so if you can't find something necessarily that just totally hits all the right notes for you, that's okay too. And if you need to just kind of pick and choose some things from different traditions, that's totally fine.
Yeah. I need to feed the cat. You can cut this out in post. Bitty.
I'm just gonna finally flash some nip.
How would you go about reconciling the aesthetic of hedonism and opulence with Christianity's call to dying to the flesh and asceticism?
You've come to the right place.
I am sitting on an antique Oscar Wilde couch with flowers and a skull, and I'm eating chocolate and wine. I'm very into the decadence, right? I'm very into hedonism and opulence, and that is something that is not only pleasurable for me, but I find meaning in. Actually, one of my favorite things about Christianity is that I think it is like the perfect tension and the perfect non-duality between like asceticism and a bacchanal, like truly. I think that especially in the teachings of Jesus, it's always this like yes and no, and like these hard teachings pulling in different directions. You know, Christ was someone who was in the desert for 40 days, not eating or drinking, you know, resisting the temptations of the devil, and was also someone who brought wine to a wedding and who would have big dinner parties with sex workers and tax collectors and people that were considered on the margins of society, and who told people to give away their wealth and also told people to, you know, enjoy their time on earth. And it's something that I find really, really compelling about the figure and about the faith. And Christianity historically, I really feel like lives in this tension. You know, we have desert fathers and we have monasteries and people who deny themselves to kind of attain a vision of God. And we are also an ecstatic mystery, death, and resurrection cult. Like that is the definition of what this faith is, whether or not you like it. That's the tradition it arose from. It was very influenced by the cult of Dionysus and Mithras. And even outside of influence, like this is a death and resurrection cult that is about living large in the body while also denying the self to look forward to the future. So that's just something that I find really compelling about the religion. It's one of the reasons that I stay. There's like light and dark and self-denial and self-indulgence and the carnal and the spiritual all tied up together. And it is delicious. That's what I found.
Yeah, I think that the fact that we were created for the garden and that every picture of the world to come that Jesus talks about is a banquet speaks volumes. We were meant to feel the air, we were meant to taste the fruit, we were meant to have sex, we were meant to be bodies. And Jesus resurrecting as a body speaks to the fact that this isn't some kind of platonic, like soon we'll escape this. It's we will resurrect as more so bodies, we'll be super bodies. And I think it's really a shame that the word for flesh was translated as flesh in the New Testament, because the words for body and flesh are different words in the Greek.
Yeah.
Flesh, I think, maybe could have been translated more correctly as gluttony or just kind of like selfish, imprudent, kind of over the top indulgence that is maybe bad for your body or bad for other people's bodies or whatever it may be. But the body itself is, I mean, dare we say, the temple of the Holy Spirit. And it's not just this vessel. I mean, within Christian theology, this is different in other traditions.
Right.
It's not just this kind of box that our soul is trapped in that we have to keep under control. It's very much so just as much the core of our identity as the soul would be. Zane and I have talked about the difference between being classy and classist. Like there's a way to embrace beauty and embrace physical, tangible things and sensual things and all these sorts of things without, you know, taking more than your share, making it so other people can enjoy those things.
What advice would you and Rachel have regarding the role of a parent in the spiritual growth of their kids? How does a parent balance teaching children while simultaneously giving them the room to explore and grow on their own and protecting them from things which would take advantage of them? Rachel, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I think it's probably the same for any part of parenting, where you can have parameters, and you can give advice, and you can say things that you think are wise and all this sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it is their choice, of course. And that can be pretty painful, whether it's with spiritual matters or with the choices of the kind of person they date or whatever it is. And I think that that's something that going into parenting, you just need to be okay with from the get-go, is that this person is separate from you. They have a bunch of your DNA, but they are their own person. And so sometimes they'll go through with something that you think is really dangerous or toxic or whatever, but it is their story, it is their journey, and they have to do that. I think as far as involving young children in the practices of the parents, I think that can be really helpful, because that can give a sense of just religion or spirituality in general and what that kind of looks like, the sorts of feelings that arise from that, the function that those sorts of practices serve in a full life. But I think as long as you do that with languaging that doesn't make them feel afraid to question it, or if they have any kind of sense of doubt or a way that they may do something differently, if you're able to create space for that, I think it can be a really nurturing and empowering thing for a child. Yeah, and I think this kind of goes back to the faith forward versus outcomes based religions. But if you're in a more outcomes based kind of tradition where there's just very specific things that you would hope that you and your child and anyone would get out of your tradition, if you can focus on those things but leave it pretty open-ended as to how your child gets there, I think that can serve a lot of ends.
I am not a mother.
Yeah, we also need to we are thoroughly qualified pet owners who are here to tell you how to raise your children.
I've worked with children a lot. I ran a church nursery for a while, and I do childcare, and I've done tutoring and stuff, so I'm around kiddos, but I'm not a mother, and unclear if that will happen. But I'm going to echo everything Rachel said. There was also an extension of this question asking specifically about magic practice that I can jump into, because Rachel did such a good job talking about just spirituality in general. And the extension question was, how do you teach them magic knowing it can make them outcasts, or do you hide that practice from them for a time? My opinion on this is that you just treat it as you would any other part of your spiritual practice. Know that it's ultimately their decision as to whether they want to interact with it or partake of it, and that you can't control that outcome for them, but that it's an important part of your spiritual practice and you have the option to share with them. I will preface this by saying it depends on what your practice looks like. If you are if you are going into conclave and doing really high-end rituals, if you're doing a lot of ceremonial stuff where a kid can't really be involved, if you're dealing with things that you might not want around your children, that you feel secure that you can interact with, but a child might not, you have to take their safety into consideration and also your own practice. If you do have practices in your life that you can safely and easily involve children with, any sort of eclectic rituals, any sort of wheel of the year stuff, or just more low-end sort of intro practice, do it in front of your kids. See if they want to be involved. The same way that you might exercise in front of a child, that can be fraught, but or do your work in front of a child or paint in front of a child, something you're passionate about, and just see if they're curious. If they ask questions, answer them. You, as a parent, spend a lot of time trying to talk to your kids about stuff that might be up here and bring it down to their level. You can do that with magic. And I will say that children are already really, really magically minded. That sort of magical thinking and seeing those connections between things come really, really easily to children. And I would say, in terms of wondering if it's going to make them outcasts, how your child presents himself in the world and how they approach their own spiritual practice is going to ultimately be up to them. They're going to go through stages. How they feel about it in childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, late adulthood is going to be very different.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in with us today. If you want to explore your personal spiritual journey and the practices that resonate with you, in conjunction with what you really believe and what you value. Spiritual direction really is a great way to do that. And if you'd like to schedule a free first session with me, you can do so through the link in the comments. I'm doing all of my sessions over video chat these days. So no matter where you are, we can meet.
Rachel, thank you so much for your time and for having me. And thank you for everyone who is watching this video and who submitted your questions and were a little vulnerable with us. I really appreciate it. It's been a true pleasure. If you want to connect with me, I'm on Instagram. I am on Instagram, but if you want to connect with me, I'm on Twitter at S_T_Gibson. I spend a lot of time on there. And then I, of course, run Holy Roots Tarot, which is a kind of intuitive, collaborative tarot practice that's really focused on helping people connect with their really rooted intrinsic goodness and their ability to discern for themselves and explore their own lives. So I hope that the experience is very empowering, and we can do a reading about anything you want. But lately I've been doing a lot for creatives trying to write or produce during coronavirus. And I've also been doing a lot of the classic love and career and spirituality readings. So if it's a faith practice or just something fun that you're interested in exploring, I love first timers and I would love to connect with you. And so you can schedule a session or just learn a little bit more about my practice at holyrootstarot.com.